What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 5 of the DRS Podcast, your pit stop for Formula One. We're here this week to talk to you about the Monza Grand Prix, which was an awesome race weekend, sprint qualifying weekend, qualifying on a Friday night, sprint race on Saturday, and a very, very exciting race on Sunday.
Right. And the first thing to start off with is why I'm wearing this hat today. This is my Senna hat. For all those McLaren boys out there, what a weekend for Danny. What a drive. I mean, just incredible to see him back.
Yeah,
back up
that was really, really awesome. Nice to see McLaren back on the top steps of the podium, 1-2 finish for the team. The first one in, I think, like we said, 10 or 11 years. Really impressive. They're being led by Zach Brown, who's just doing an awesome job, having turned that team around from some really, really dark years near 2015, 2016. So nice to see them back at the top of the step.
Absolutely. Now just on to quali. And the main thing to talk about there is Valtteri Bottas and his amazing pole lap. Really just outdoing the entire field there, completely deserving it after being dropped from Mercedes a couple of weeks earlier. Yeah,
like we spoke about on the last pod, Valtteri was dropped from Mercedes for the 2022 season. He'll be joining Alfa Romeo with his spot at Mercedes being taken by a very deserving George Russell. But I think it was definitely a little bit of a revenge performance for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he didn't even get the tow from Lewis. Lewis was the one behind him getting the tow, and Lewis still couldn't put it on pole. So must have been a pretty special lap for Valtteri.
I think so. He was really happy in his interviews. He seemed pretty pleased with his performance, and he's hard on himself. So it's nice to see that.
Absolutely. So Lewis P2, as we mentioned, with a solid lap, but obviously not good enough for pole. Max P3, which was a pretty good result for Red Bull considering they were quite off the pace throughout the first practice session and throughout Q1 and Q2. And that's really because Sergio Perez was punching a hole through the air for Max Verstappen, really giving him a perfect tow, playing the team game just to get Max up as high as he possibly could. And that actually resulted in him being P9 in quali, which looks really poor on paper, but he was playing the team game there.
Yeah, definitely a good, it's definitely tough to do when you're trying to perform as well. Look, it is elite sports. You want to do well at the same time, but although it doesn't seem like it, it is still a team game, right? So there are circumstances where you do have to do things that benefit, not yourself, but your team. So he was on the back end of that one.
Right, and just to continue on that, McLaren's P4 and 5 with a very solid quality to start off the weekend. Although they were both a little bit upset not to get Max, considering they were both, I believe, within half a tenth. Danny Rick on the radio being like, Danny Rick went on the radio and I was like, these little gaps don't like me. These little gaps don't like me.
Yeah.
But still quite a solid performance, especially with how their weekend went on to go. Gasly sticking it into the top 6 like he literally does every single
it's insane.
weekend. Yeah, he performs really well. Yuki's not anywhere with him there really at all.
Yeah, nowhere close at this point.
But Gasly, he is, although they signed Sergio Perez for next year, Red Bull, you just have to say that Pierre Gasly, this year as much as last year, he's on a tear. He's on a tear. Drivers of the season, like undoubtedly, especially when it comes to qualifying, the car is always up there.
Consistent performing.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, consistent performance, right? I mean, he's in a tier 2 team in Formula One. It's no one's hiding that, right? He's not in the Red Bull car. He's in an AlphaTauri, and he's just killing it week in, week out. Well, at least for the most part.
Right. And the Ferraris, P7, P8. Not too bad. Obviously, that's not where they want to be, like we keep on saying in nearly every podcast, but much better than last year where Seb was out in Q1 and Charles was P13 in qualifying. So P7 and P8, a solid improvement, but not where they want to be. Yeah,
and generally speaking, I mean, consistent as hell. Like, I mean, look where they are in the championship standings, right? They're next to each other, basically. Right. So it's a decent showing.
It also shows, though, that they're both at a pretty similar level, probably getting the most or nearly the most out of the car, because they're always within a couple tenths of each other, always performing at a high level, and generally, aren't too far away from each other on the grid.
Which was a topic of conversation, I think, moving into the season, right? In Carlos Sainz's first year at Ferrari, people were skeptical of how well he would adapt to that car. Like we saw at McLaren, Daniel Ricciardo won this race, but up to this point, he had not had a fantastic season, right? So as we mentioned many times, it takes time to get used to the car that you're driving. So it is nice to see that Carlos has picked up the pace and has really done a solid job.
Right, and that's also just a nod to how good he really is, which is what we've seen this season, as well as how good Lando is, which we've also seen this season. GOP10, solid quali, back into Q3. ever since he's been on the hot seat, his qualifying performances have really, really been there. He's been on the pace, on the edge of Q3 and Q3.
Yeah.
I think that's 3 weekends in a row now. So you have to give it to him in qualifying. He's there. It's just about bringing that consistency in the race, which he really hasn't.
And it's nice to see, especially because he's a guy who is fighting for a seat in Formula One, right? Kimi Räikkönen's retiring, and we know Valtteri Bottas is coming to that team, but there's no guarantees on Giovinazzi at Alfa Romeo, and there's a crazy driver lineup that could take his spot, right? So
right, like you said, there's so many young guys, so many young guns who have the potential and the talent to be in Formula One. So I mean, Gio's on the hot seat now, and you can say yes, he's performing in qualifying, but is that just too little, too late? I think it's going to end up being too little, too late.
I do as well, but yeah, well, I'm sure we'll find out soon enough, right?
And so onto the sprint. I mean, it wasn't the most exciting sprint, unfortunately. Even though Monza has very, very long straights, it's pretty hard to overtake there, just as it being a DRS train. And that's what we saw after Lewis's bad start. He dropped down to P5 behind those McLarens and was basically stuck behind Lando the whole time.
Stuck, yeah. And I just want to jump back quickly for a second. It makes a difference, especially at a track like Monza, where qualifying is important. The bottom 10 were basically what you would expect for this year. The Aston Martins 11 and 12 in a spot that they would really rather not be, struggling, I'd say, still to find the pace that they had last year. So we'll see. I think as for this season, it's hard to tell how much improvement can be made, but I'm sure a big focus on 2022. Alpine's 13 and 14, followed by both Williams, and the usual bottom 4, unfortunately, with Yuki, and then the two Haas's. And actually, Robert Kubica filling in for Kimi, who had COVID, but will very happily be back this week in Russia.
Absolutely. So now back to the sprint. Like we said, Lewis with a pretty poor start. Gasly, he's not lucky on the first lap. We can go back to even Bahrain at the beginning of this season. Very, very similar incident when he touched the back left tire of a McLaren with his front wing, put it off a little bit, heading into the Curva Grande, full speed, 300 kilometers per hour, and it flies under his car. He was like a rocket going into the wall. It was pretty scary. But,
that was very scary to see.
Yeah, he's got to get some lap one luck, because I mean, right now, every race,
that's for sure.
I feel like every podcast we're talking about is great qualifying, but often it's either a very quiet race and he ends up finishing P6, P7, P5, very solid results, or he ends up in the wall lap one. So I mean, just some consistency to get going there and on Sundays for Pierre, but aside from that, really good.
But generally speaking, holding the fort down at AlphaTauri.
Right, Valtteri P1. Hey,
yeah,
like we said, the guy gets dropped and he's
he had an awesome sprint. He did what he had to, right? Though you get 3 points, it's 3 points. But I think it's more of a morale booster rather than caring for 3 points. But it's nevertheless good to have.
Right, and I think that you saw there in Valtteri his kind of mentality of that being more of a race win than just I got my 3 points and a little bit of a sprint win. Like, especially because, like we'll talk about after or very shortly, he took a new engine for the Italian Grand Prix, meaning that he started the race last. So for him, that was his opportunity to get the win. Wasn't sprint.
No, absolutely.
So for him, that sprint win, especially with the fact that he hasn't come across a line first anytime really recently, that must have been a very big morale boost for him.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And Max with the solid
moving on
for Max.
Yeah, I don't think he can complain at all. Other than that, nothing too exciting really. The field stayed relatively the same. There were a lot of comments actually online about how to improve the sprint format. I think people like it, but right now the way it's being implemented might not be the best solution, right? Because it's mixed in with a second practice before the sprint on Saturday, but that's after qualifying. I don't necessarily know if that's necessary, right? Because I mean, it's more time in the car, but if you're after a qualifying session already, why go back to a practice, right? That's how I see it.
Right, and the thing is, it's a little bit weird with obviously it's a third race distance, and then you get awarded just 3 points for the winner, 2 for second, and 1 for third. And I think that maybe, in my opinion, this is my perspective on this situation, which is just what I think that they can do is that, you can keep that point system that they have, but allow for possibly switching the top 10 in quali. So let's say you have, flip the top 10. That way, if George Russell, for example, is Williams or somebody else next year, puts in a stellar quali and gets into Q3 in a car that doesn't deserve to be there, well, now you're on pole.
Yeah,
sprint,
exactly.
Right?
It makes the race interesting, right?
Right.
Because,
and not only
go ahead.
All right. And not only that, that not only does it make the sprint race interesting, it also just creates an environment where drivers don't feel like they never have a chance at anything. If you can go on a Saturday into a sprint race, which doesn't change the grid for Sunday, but a separate sprint race that allows drivers to compete for a couple points and maybe even a medal, guys who are at the back of the grid, that's like a tremendous
dream, right? If they can, even if that requires like the craziest defending for 30 laps or whatever it is, right? That's fun, right? That's what these guys live for. You can ask if you speak to anyone who races in Formula One who hasn't had big success. Obviously, it's an honor, it's a privilege to race in the sport. It's a tremendous amount of work. But if you're spending every weekend, right, at the back of the grid, I mean, look, that's no fun. We saw when George Russell scored points at Williams. I mean, he was in tears, right? After a few years there, you just see how much it means to progress up the grid, and let alone to compete for a win. That's obviously the ultimate goal.
Right, and just an example that I'd like to bring on to that conversation is just a guy like Fernando Alonso, who's come back into the sport and wants to be competing for race wins. Imagine Fernando Alonso qualifies P9, P10. Let's say Fernando Alonso qualifies P9.
The front row, right?
Sebastian Vettel qualifies P10. All of a sudden, you're back in 2012 here.
Yeah.
You got Alonso and Seb going wheel to wheel down to turn one, and I don't know a single F1 fan that wouldn't want to see that.
Yeah, it would be incredible. I think you would definitely generate more fans, without a doubt.
Absolutely. All right, so onto the race, and I'm going to go get my Senna hat back because Danny Rick is deserving of this one. And I think that, I know for me at least, I was watching the race, watching them go down into turn one, and I was just standing up and cheering. And Danny Rick's not my favorite driver.
Freaking out.
Daniel Ricciardo, I really like him. I think he's a really cool guy, and he's not my favorite driver. But going into turn one, I was up out of my seat, freaking out.
Yeah, I think you had to be. I mean, it is so exciting to see.
Mm-hmm. And so he got a great start, got alongside Max, and of course, got heading to turn one. And at that point, I think we were really all excited because we were like, okay, how long can he hold off Max? Because obviously Max is going to get him eventually.
Yeah, Max is going to have the pace, right?
We saw he was up behind Danny for most of that first stint, 20 laps. He was always within, let's say, 2 seconds, sometimes within a second, and we'd be like, oh, is this where Max is going to get him? But could never really get close enough to dive bomb him into turn one.
Yeah, but it was impressive to watch and really exciting to watch as well.
Yeah. So then first stops happened where McLaren, I think, had either their best stop of the season or one of them, which just
the team was flowing, right? When things are working, right? Pit stops are important. They're snappy, they're quick. It really helps for the race.
And that also is going to give huge confidence to the team because in the highest of pressure situations, they just delivered the perfect stop. Yeah, and exactly. Max had the exact opposite, which is one of Red Bull's worst stops I've ever seen.
And Red Bull, who had, historically, especially this year and last year, had multiple sub 2 second pit stops. I mean, every weekend they were winning fastest pit stop of the week. So to have this happen to them was definitely, suboptimal. It's a good way to put it.
Right. And that was where everything kind of went downhill for Max and Lewis in this race.
Yeah.
And that's because Max's bad pit stop allowed Lewis to get right alongside him as Lewis was coming out of the pits a couple laps later.
Yep.
And this is where things get a little bit, let's say, tricky. Exactly. Because Max went around the outside of Lewis as Lewis was coming out of the pits. They were almost side by side going into the corner. And then at the second part of that first chicane, Max gets pushed off, hits a curb, flies up onto Lewis's car, which was pretty scary, and they're both out of the race.
It was a really scary accident. Regardless of who thinks who's to blame, right?
those are moments where you're actually very thankful for some of the safety advances in Formula One, where a wheel of a Formula One car grazed the top of Lewis Hamilton's head, and he basically walked out of the car with no problems at all, right?
Except for a sore neck, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Which is nothing.
Right. And, that just shows that halos are not only for the high speed, big impacts, barriers, other cars. This was in F1 terms, a relatively slow crash. Going into that corner, turning left, they can be 50, 60 kilometers an hour, maybe even less.
Maybe less.
Right. And still, you can have a situation where if there's no halo there, Lewis can be in a much worse situation than he is today. And I think that as F1 fans, we just have to be super thankful for that.
Yeah, you have to be super thankful for things like that. That's for sure.
And then, after that incident, we had Danny Rick P1 with little challenging really from behind, Charles P2, and Lando
but again,
P3.
had to perform to keep that McLaren in front.
Oh, absolutely. And we saw that in the safety car restart, which he was clearly super focused, got off really well. And then we saw Lando put on one of the bravest moves I've seen in a long time, again, around the Curva Grande. I think he had 2 tires on the grass, kept his foot in and just
crazy
ripped it down. Yeah, it was nuts.
Nuts. Yeah, easy. We've said it time and time again here. He's a talented driver, and you pull off moves like that. You definitely deserve to be in that position.
And then continuing on there, Valtteri, like we said earlier, had an amazing weekend, and that really just continued into the race. P19 to P3.
Yeah, what can you say? Like we said, he seemed more motivated than normal, I think, this weekend to put on a good show, and he definitely did that.
Right, and as much as everyone was so happy for the McLaren boys, you can't help but think that Valtteri comes out of that weekend and says, what could have been, because
it's tough.
Max and Lewis out of the race, and he was the fastest car all weekend anyway. Yeah. So it begs the question: could that have been a 15, maybe even 20-second dominant win from Valtteri, which we haven't seen since Australia 2019?
It's been a very long time since we've seen a performance like that. But then I guess it was a catch-up performance all day. But balancing that with a win, yes, obviously they're not the same, right? You finish P3, you finish P1, but I think nevertheless still a really strong performance, and something I think a lot of maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but definitely some Formula One fans enjoyed to see.
Right, and just to cap off on Danny's weekend as a whole, what that must do to his confidence is amazing. We've seen Will Buxton in some of the post-race interviews saying that our post-race show saying that these are the first times in Daniel Ricciardo's career where we've seen him visually down. For such a smiley guy, visually down. And what this must do to his confidence is really amazing, and I'm excited to see what he can do for the rest of the season because of that.
Yeah, and there were so many clips of him after the race, just so pure elation, just relief and joy. I think who are just probably the 2 biggest emotions for a guy who hasn't won a race in a few years now, who I guess you could say objectively struggled at Renault. It didn't pan out in the way he wanted it to pan out. Definitely caused a lot of doubt. I think, right, you're a Formula One driver at the highest level, but there's no guarantee of anything. He's getting older in the sport, and he moved to McLaren to try and renew that faith, that prosperity. And I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something along the lines of I never left, right? Maybe I took a break.
Moved aside for a little while.
I moved aside. That's what he said. I moved aside, but I never left. And to hear that from a guy who's just so determined in Formula One to stay at the top is great to hear. And it shows that on our episode 2 with Danny Ricciardo's trainer Michael Italiano, who said, I just want to make Daniel just kick ass. He's done it, right? He won a race. That's where you want to be.
You got to give Michael some credit in there too, because he has to go in and really motivate Danny, and continue to do what's best for Danny. And I think that that just shows the work that they've put in all year. As a team at McLaren and as a team with Danny and his guys and his girls. So I think that we just have to give him a lot of credit for that. And Yeah,
Totally agree.
like I said earlier, I'm really excited to see what type of momentum that can bring them, not only for the end of this season, but going into next year when we don't know
it
what's
can be
going
a
to
lot.
happen.
It can be a lot, and McLaren year over year, I think I saw the point tally from year over year. It's a steadily increasing, almost exponentially increasing increase year over year of the points that they've been able to score as a team, which is great to see. Obviously, moving into 2022, regulations are different, the cars are different. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of performance, but still solid results, and it makes you expect that at least the success will continue to be there.
And just before we get into our predictions for next race this coming weekend in Sochi, I do want to briefly cover the championship standings as we do in every podcast.
Yeah.
And starting with the drivers, which Max still in front. Over the whole weekend, he only gained 2 points on Lewis from that sprint race. So he's on 226.5, Lewis 221.5.
Those 0.5s are gonna suck for the rest of the season, huh?
Yeah, it could be decided by 0.5 come the end of the season.
Imagine that.
Yeah, I mean Lewis has been there before, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Valtteri P3, Lando P4, Sergio P5. Like we said earlier, with the Ferrari is just super consistent. Always one right behind the other. P6 and P7, Leclerc followed by Sainz. Danny Rick P8 getting quite a points boost from that win.
Yeah, that's huge.
Gasly P9, consistent as ever, and Fernando Alonso rounding at the top 10. Just as the sprint race was, the bottom 10 kind of how you'd expect it to be. Ocon followed by the Aston Martins, Tsunoda, the Williams, the Alfa Romeos, and the Haas's. And really, kind of what we expect in the bottom 10. Nothing moving around too much there.
There was a little toss-up between Mick and Mazepin, if I remember. There was some heated words.
Yes.
I think Mazepin was saying that they're friendly guys. They talk, but on the track, you're battling just as hard as anyone. But I think there's definitely been some team orders there because they've been pretty stagnant in their positions. One weekend one guy leads the other. But I guess you're free to race most of the time. But I don't know. He didn't seem too happy at the end. There.
No, absolutely, and also, they're only racing each other. Their cars.
Yeah.
I mean, their cars. Let's be honest, so bad that they're only really ever racing each other, except for at the start of the races. So when you're racing one guy all season and your entire goal is to beat him, and he's your teammate, there's always going to be some tension there, no matter where you are.
Of course.
No matter where you are on the grid. And yeah, just onto the Constructors Championship. Mercedes now with a solid 18-point lead, which is pretty good for them. I mean,
it's nothing crazy, right? That's a second place finish.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I'd be surprised if Red Bull caught that back up in one weekend, but in 2-3, I mean, I can flip.
You don't expect a double Mercedes. If I predict a double Mercedes DNF, I'll buy a lottery ticket. And that's never going to happen. So
right, exactly. Red Bull P2, McLaren P3, 13 and a half points ahead of McLaren, ahead of Ferrari, followed by Alpine, AlphaTauri, solid in P6, Aston in P7, Williams P8, Alfa Romeo P9, and Haas P10, still on their lonely 0 points.
Yeah. I don't know what's worse, that or the lowly Aston Martin performance this year that's just been pretty dog poop.
Like we said, Lawrence Stroll is fuming every time he sees his cars cross the line out of the points. He's not going to be.
Oh, there was a great picture of him with a shovel when they announced their new factory last week. Him, Otmar, and another guy. I don't know who it was.
Yeah, main investor.
Other main investor, because they're building a new factory. It was hilarious. It was really funny.
You think Lawrence is actually going to shovel anything?
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, he's going to be excited for next year. Hopefully to turn this around, because Lawrence is a pretty intense guy and he doesn't want to wait around in seventh. Like he always says, this is a championship team. He wants to build a championship team. So he sees no reason why they can't be up there. So we'll see what they do next.
We'll see what happens.
And now just on to some predictions for the Russian Grand Prix. Sean, what you got?
I think if we're carrying momentum, I think not actually even a crazy prediction is you expect Valtteri to be somewhere near the top, if not at the top. he had historically done well there, and came off a really strong weekend. So I'll be interested to see if Valtteri can actually pull a win together for the first time in a while, like a proper win, this coming weekend. And then again, will be interesting to see if McLaren keeps up the pace that they've had recently. And of course, Max, had he not crashed out, would be right up there, if not nearly in front. So I think at this point of the season, right, these predictions are really just going to be, it's like throwing a bet, because there's so much that can happen now. But yeah, I'd be confident to see Valtteri near or at the top.
Who you got P3? I mean, I assume Lewis P2 then, but who you got?
Let's go crazy and say Charles.
Okay, I like
P3.
it.
Who knows? Probably not going to happen. But
I mean, I don't think that's a bad prediction at all. But because I have to disagree with you, can never agree with a brother. It's not the way things work around here. So I have to say, I don't like to say it because not even like a good prediction. It's not exciting, but Lewis P1, just because I purely don't see anyone except for those two winning this weekend, with Max starting at the back because of his engine penalties that he's taking this weekend. So I would say Lewis P1.
Oh, it's true. Max is going to start at the back of the grid.
Yeah, he's going to start at the back of the grid. So I'm going to say Lewis P1, Valtteri P2, and like Will Buxton was saying at the beginning of the season, his favorite guy, really, Pierre Gasly P3. I want to see Gasly back on that podium. Gasly back on that podium, or Sainz. Throw Carlos.
That would win you a nice bet, huh? Wouldn't it?
Yeah. Having Gasly or Carlos up there this weekend would cap off with what I think might be a little bit of a stagnant, boring race around Sochi.
Yeah, never super exciting, right? It's not a great track.
It's the epitome of meh.
Yeah, and actually looking back on that, Valtteri Bottas for this weekend, who's done pretty well there. He's plus 4.5 to win, which is not a bad return on a guy who really does have a strong chance of winning. Max is 5-1 odds, which I think realistically coming from the back of the grid is just not going to happen. And then Daniel Ricciardo, Daniel Ricciardo and Lando, who performed well in the McLaren. Granted, Lewis Hamilton was out, Max Verstappen was out, and Valtteri Bottas started from last. So yes, they obviously capitalized on that, but they've been performing well. If you're feeling risky, Lando is 26-1 and Danny Rick's 34-1. So if you're looking for a big payday, not a bad bet.
Yeah, that'd be exciting. Imagine you're really brave. You put $100 on Lando and you end up with 3,600 at the end of the day. Wouldn't be too bad.
That's not too bad, huh? Not too bad.
That really caps it off for our Italian Grand Prix podcast. That's episode 5 of the DRS podcast. Thank you guys for watching. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Hope you enjoyed some predictions, some betting talk, and we'll see you soon.
Make sure to like and subscribe.